Okay, let's talk about the word Sharia. It's a word you hear everywhere, right? It's at the absolute center of some of the most intense debates happening all over the world. It drives policy, it fuels political drama, and it creates these massive divides. But what if? What if this entire global firestorm is all based on a huge misunderstanding of what that one single word actually means? Let's get into it. So you kind of have to start with the perspective that's driving the whole controversy. And this quote, it really nails it. The idea is that Islam and Sharia are totally inseparable, that the religion is the law and the law is the religion. For most people, this is the starting point for the whole conversation. And this way of thinking leads to this really fascinating, kind of tangled situation, especially in the West. On the one hand, you have this deep commitment to religious freedom. You know, the idea that Muslims should be totally free to practice their faith. But on the other hand, you have this really strong pushback against Sharia law. See the problem? If Islam and Sharia are the exact same thing, you can't hold both of those positions at the same time. It just doesn't compute. It's a real paradox. Okay, so let's just lock in this conventional definition because it's super important. When people are arguing about Sharia, 9 times out of 10, this is what they mean. A massive divine rule book, a legal and moral code that supposedly comes from the Quran and the Prophet's life, and it covers literally everything from how you pray to how you run a country. It's seen as this fixed, detailed set of laws. But here's the pivot. Here's the big what if. What if that definition, the very thing everyone is arguing about, is just wrong? What if we've all been debating a concept without ever going back to the original source code to see what the word itself actually means? So that's what we're going to do. We're going straight to the source, the Quran. We're going to try to peel back all those layers of tradition and politics that have been piled on top for centuries and just look at how the text itself uses the root of the word Sharia. And what you find, well, it's a radically different definition. And what's so fascinating is that the root for Sharia barely even shows up in the Quran, just a handful of times. And each time, it adds another piece to the puzzle. It's called a path, but not just for Muhammad. It's the same path given to Noah, Abraham, and Jesus. The text also uses it to warn against humans just inventing their own religious paths. It's described as a path you are placed on, not one that you build yourself. And this is a big one. It says that different communities each have their own path. But this right here is the most powerful clue because it's so visual. This verse has nothing to do with law. It's about fish. It's describing how on the Sabbath, the fish came sharan, which means they came right up to the surface, openly, where everyone could see them. They were just right there, accessible. The word itself paints a picture of something becoming visible and clear. So when you put all of those pieces together, the Quran's definition of Sharia isn't a complex legal code at all. It's the path that surfaces, the clear, accessible way. And the one time the Quran actually defines what's on this path, it's incredibly simple. Connect to the divine and don't create division among people. That's it. It's a guiding principle, not a massive book of laws. Okay, so that obviously leads to a giant question. If the Quran's version of Sharia is this simple core principle, then where on earth did the huge legal system that we call Sharia law actually come from? And this is where we get into the difference between Sharia, that divine path, and something called fiqh, which is basically the human attempt to understand God's will. So the real question is, what's the source code for all that fiqh? Well, the traditional formula for Islamic law is built on 2 main pillars. First, you have the Quran, the revelation itself. But it's said that you also need a second source, the Hadith. These are thousands and thousands of stories about what the Prophet Muhammad supposedly said and did, all written down centuries after he lived. But this is where it gets really interesting, because the Quran itself seems to push back on that 2-source idea. Right there in the text, the messenger is told to say, again and again, I only follow what is revealed to me. It's very specific. He's basically defining his own job as delivering the revelation, not creating a second one alongside it. And then the Quran goes even further. It takes that exact same word, hadith, which just means a story or a narration, and uses it to describe itself. It literally calls itself the best hadith. Think about that. If the Quran is the best narration, it really makes you question why you'd need volumes and volumes of other secondary narrations to understand it. Now, remember that verse that warned against humans making up their own religious paths? Here it is again. The Quran frames this act, humans creating religious law that God didn't authorize, as setting up partners with God. In the Quran's own terminology, this is shirk, and it's considered the single worst thing you can possibly do. So making up unauthorized religious law isn't just a simple mistake. From the text point of view, it's a major theological foul. And finally, the Quran just leaves us with this incredibly powerful, direct question. It basically says, after you have God and his verses, what other a hadith, what other narration, what other story are you going to believe in? The text itself seems to be making a case for its own sufficiency. Okay, so let's hit the reset button for a second. Let's set aside all the human-made legal stuff and just focus on the principles we find inside the Quran itself. What kind of society would that actually create? This is where we go from theory to seeing how this stuff plays out in the real world. Well, when you pull the principles for a just society straight from the Quran, you end up with a framework that's pretty clear and universal. First, an absolute commitment to justice. A justice so important you have to apply it even to your worst enemies. Second, total freedom of conscience, famously summed up as no compulsion in religion. And third, a system of governance based on consultation, where the community makes decisions for the community. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds great, but can you actually measure that? Well, a group of academics decided to try. They created something called the Islamicity Index. It completely ignores what a country calls itself, and instead, it just looks at the hard data to see how well its actual policies line up with those core Quranic values. And the results are, well, they're pretty shocking. The countries that consistently rank at the very top of the Islamicity Index, the nations whose societies actually reflect these Quranic principles the most in practice, are not Muslim-majority countries. They're places like New Zealand, Sweden, and Denmark. And here's the flip side of that coin. Many of the nations that proudly declare that they are governed by a Sharia law, they consistently rank near the absolute bottom of the list. The data shows a massive gap between the religious brand a country uses and the actual justice and freedom it provides for its citizens. So what we're left with are two completely different paths, two totally different understandings that both spring from the very same word. The entire global controversy seems to boil down to which definition you choose to follow. Let's just put them right next to each other. On one side, you have viewpoint A. Sharia is a massive, complex legal code built by humans over hundreds of years from lots of different sources. This is the version that fuels the whole political firestorm. Then you have viewpoint B, which comes straight from the Quran. Sharia is a simple core principle. It's that clear, accessible path to connect with the divine and bring people together. And that really leaves us with one final crucial question. What's the actual goal here? Is the point just to slap a specific religious label on a country no matter what the results are? Or is the goal to build a society that is genuinely just, free, and prosperous for every single citizen based on those universal principles of justice and freedom that the Quran itself seems to champion? The text seems to have a pretty clear answer.